Right now, the most often asked question is, what do we do with generative AI? How do we incorporate it into our AI strategy? And so, clearly we need to help educate them, and they need to educate their organization on what generative AI can do, what some of its risks are, and to be able to take those things into consideration as they're deploying generative AI. But a bigger picture question is, how do we put things into production? We've been doing AI for a long time, and so we've learned a lot of things about how you put things into production, but now we have to incorporate that into a larger picture of incorporating generative AI into those same sets of processes. You see some of the same things?
Similar. I would suggest that it's not just in AI strategy, but actually in automation strategy, and that's probably the number one question I'm being asked more recently is, where does GenAI fit in our automation strategy? What does it replace? Does it replace the things that we've already done? We see generative AI being used in a number of different ways in the automation space. The number one reason that the vendors are doing is, can we use GenAI to actually do the automations using natural language? And so we've gone from traditional developers to citizen developers to now verbal developers. And so we're seeing GenAI used in that sense. From an automation perspective, though, we're also seeing new capabilities which use GenAI, being able to automate processes that we would have deemed not being able to be automatable before, creative processes being those, technical processes, deep knowledge, domain expertise type processes. And so again, the question is, where can GenAI augment what we've already done? Where can it reach into places that we haven't actually automated historically? What's the type of solutions that we should be using? Where are we going to find those opportunities? What are the business cases that surround those opportunities? And I guess things like, how are we going to govern generative AI? Because as an enterprise, we love a guaranteed outcome. Generative AI it doesn't give us necessarily that guarantee. And so governance is also a really interesting area. And I don't know what your thoughts would be on AI and Gen AI governance, and what questions you've been asked around that.
So the governance issue is a big one. And governance is rising in awareness and popularity in general. And AI is partially driving some of that increased awareness, because we do have these models that appear to be producing something that's valid, but unless you do some external validation, you don't know necessarily that you have a valid result. The other thing to remember is that in traditional or predictive AI, the prediction is never 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand that, and you have to think about that as you build these models and build governance processes into place. How do you do it? Well, first of all, you have to be aware of the issues. Second of all, there is tooling now. There's tooling to detect bias. There's tooling to help with the sampling, make sure you don't have a bias in your sample data. There's tooling to detect model drift. So there are ways to do it, but the questions we get are, how do you do this? And it's good that they're asking the questions, because they do have to be aware of it.
Exactly. And just to add to that, I think as well, the reason why I think the role of governance has increased is because if you imagine where we were with traditional predictive AI, small group of people, data scientists, in a corner of an organization building models. Suddenly we have AI that is accessible by everybody on just about every device for pretty much free. And suddenly we have now this tool that everyone is wanting to use. Now, if everyone's wanting to use a technology, suddenly you have to have governance. You have to have an increased level of governance. And so, whether it's from federal, states, enterprise, everybody is thinking about this right now. How do we govern the use of a technology that has become increasingly prevalent, that also has such high risks associated with it? You mentioned bias, outcomes, hallucinations, the quality of output, and all of these things are still things that we have to consider. They do form part of your governance, your framework. We have really had to rethink a lot of this in the age of Gen AI. And I think I've had more conversations about how do we govern the safe and secure usage of AI in the last 3 months than I'd had probably in the last 13 years.